if you're new here, I am Kira. Welcome. Today we're going to do something a bit different, something that I want to do more. Please let me know if you like it. We are going to talk about a book that I just read a few months ago actually. And the book is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. For the purpose of today's video, I think I want to divide this video to two parts. One is my review and my thought on this book, and the second one is basically the summary and the key takeaways for this video. So if you want to know whether or not it's worth the read, it's almost 400 pages, and if you want to know whether or not you want to read this and you want to know my thoughts, my review on this book, then stay for the first part of the video. And if you want to know what are the 7 habits without going through the whole book, you just want to know what are those, please keep watching. So basically the first part, I would not or try to refrain myself from giving out any sort of spoilers. I would just give you my thoughts on this. I did not fancy personal development or self-help books that much. I was one of the skeptics against the self-help book because I feel like what else are you going to say? And you're just going to quote us to tell us the same thing. I feel like all values, all good virtues in this world are known, told by your parents to you, maybe from your teachers, maybe from your peers. So I feel like what else could you possibly say? What else could possibly be there in a self-help book that's going to help you? And boy, I was wrong. I started reading this book back in 2019. I think I only read the beginning of the chapter, the introduction, and then 2020 hit and the rest is history. And then when this year, 2021, we are hit again with the second or third wave of the pandemic, I was not in a good place mentally, emotionally. And then I remembered that I haven't finished reading this, so I just decided to pick this up and finish reading it. And so yeah, that's the story on how I become a convert to liking a self-help book. If you are thinking whether or not you should read this book, I would say go for it. Like I said before, I was one of the skeptics. I did not like personal development or self-help books for a lot of reasons. But I think that this book has given me how you think of something, how you react to something, how you deal with people, how you listen to people, how you come to an agreement, how do you get to your goal. And I feel like this book has covered that much. And so those are my thoughts, and I really have a high regard to this book because I really like it. And I know that down the road I will pick this one up again when I need some reminders on how to deal with everything. The only downside about this book that I would say is that it's a bit too long-winded. I feel like the explanation given by the author sometimes gets a bit repetitive. To be honest, there were parts of his personal sharing that I felt it's not really that relevant for you to include it in this book. Next, do I feel like 7 habits are enough? Yes, I think that he has not missed anything important enough of some sort. Everything that you ever need to become an effective people are in there. I would give this a rating of 4/5. I understand why this is a best-selling book. So let's move on to the next part, which is the key takeaways and summary of the 7 habits of highly effective people. I will try my best to put out as briefly and as accurately as possible. So in dividing the 7 habits, the author actually divided the 7 habits to 2 different parts. One is private victory and the second one is public victory. Now, private victory governs the relationship that you have, basically the principle, the values and the core. How do we deal with ourselves? How do we deal with our thoughts? How do we deal with our work? Things that only concern us independently. The next one is public victory, which concerns the relationship that you have with other people. He talks about interdependency that you have with the family, with the co-workers, with the colleagues, with the organization. So let's move on to habit number 1, which is to be proactive. In order for you to become an effective person, you have to be proactive. Now, being proactive means that you have the self-awareness, you have the independent will, and you have the conscience to choose the response to the stimulus that is happening around you or against you or to you. Basically, a proactive person do not blame circumstances, but instead they take their own initiative to deal with the stimulus. He talks about on how in between of the stimulus and response, you have something in between that is your self-awareness, your control, and also your independent will. A proactive person's behavior is based on the conscious choice that they make based on their values and their principles. So the difference between being proactive and being reactive is looking at how we talk, how our language is. A proactive person carry their own weather, and although they may still be influenced by the surrounding, but the way they respond to that surrounding is purely based on their conscious choice. Now, compared to a reactive person, they are always being carried away with the current situation, with the current condition, with the current weather. Let's look at the language of a reactive and a proactive person. A reactive person would say something like, "He makes me so mad," which means that someone else is in control of his feelings. If only my spouse is more patient or helpful, saying that someone else's behavior is affecting their own effectiveness. Now, instead of having this language which absolves you from the responsibility, a proactive person takes control over that. So instead of saying that I can't, you say I choose or I will. Instead of saying there's nothing I can do, you should say let's look at other alternatives. Instead of saying that he makes me so mad or he makes me so sad, you can say I am in control of my feelings. So you can see how proactive people has changed their language to make themselves be more responsible to their own well-being, to their own mental state. Next is to determine the degree of control over the matters that has been happening around you. Now, this is one of the reasons why I get immediately hooked up to this book when I saw this diagram. This is basically a circle of concern diagram which is provided by the author. And in this circle of concern diagram, you will put everything that is in your mind that has been concerning you. It can range from the state of the world, the state of the pandemic, how your spouse is behaving, deadlines of your projects, your financial state, the weather, so on and so forth. Every single thing that is in your list of concern, you can put everything inside of this circle of concern. Now, inside of this circle of concern, you can put another circle that is circle of influence. Now, a proactive person would focus their energy, time, and effort into this circle of influence. Why? This is because in this circle of influence, those are the things that they have a direct or indirect control over. And by determining the things that you have control over, you can be more proactive, you can be more effective in dealing with everything that has been happening. So your feelings over someone else's behavior would be inside of your circle of influence because you are in control with your own feelings. On the other hand, the weather of the day would be inside of your circle of concern because you are concerned with the weather, but it would not be in your circle of influence because you really have no control over it. And by determining whether or not you have a certain level degree of control over certain matters, it would be easier for you to navigate on how you would spend your time, your energy, and your effort in those matters that has been concerning. So the current state of the pandemic should be something in your circle of concern. I think it's in everyone's circle of concern because it has been affecting everyone, literally. But how you respond, what is your role in succumbing this pandemic is something in your circle of influence. For example, taking the vaccine, observing the SOPs would be inside of our circle of influence because we have a direct control over it, because we are able to control ourselves, but we are not able to control the state of the world. So a proactive person would definitely focus their time in something that they are able to control. The author suggested that for the things that you have a direct control over, you may practice habit 1, 2, and 3, which we will delve in a bit. And then for the things that you have an indirect control over, you may practice habit number 4, 5, and 6. And you just have to accept the fact that sometimes there are things that is just outside of your control. Putting the effort, energy, and proper time in things that you have control over would make your circle of influence getting bigger, and the space difference between your circle of influence and circle of concern is getting smaller and smaller. But a reactive person would always focus their time and energy into the things that is inside in their circle of concern, but outside of their circle of influence, which means that you keep on worrying over the things that you have no control over. Let's move on to habit number 2, which is to begin with the end in mind. The author has suggested that in order for us to become an effective person, we have to have a clear understanding of our own destination, to know where we are going. The author suggested that all things are created twice. The first one, which is the first creation, is basically the mental creation, and the second creation is the physical creation. Basically, the first creation is the plan or the destination that you are going to be or to do, and the second one, which is the physical, is basically the execution of that plan. So in order for you to have a clear understanding of your goal, of your ambition, you have to restrict yourself, and the author has suggested that for us to do our own personal mission statement. You may have seen a lot of mission statement, vision, ethos, so on, in a lot of organizations. You see how or what the organization is strived to be. And similarly, in our own personal life, we have to identify what do we want to be. How to do that? First is to look at your center. The center should have a guidance, wisdom, power, and security. And the author actually gave one mission statement of his own friend, and I feel like the mission statement is really, really on point, and it's everything that I feel like I ever needed. Succeed at home first. Seek and merit divine help. Never compromise with honesty. Remember the people involved. Hear both sides before judging. Obtain counsel of others. Defend those who are absent. Be sincere yet decisive. Develop one new proficiency a year. Plan tomorrow's work today. Hustle while you wait. Maintain a positive attitude. Keep a sense of humor. Be orderly in person and in work. Do not fear mistakes. Fear only the absence of creative, constructive, and corrective responses to those mistakes. Facilitate the success of subordinates. Listen twice as much as you speak. Concentrate all abilities and efforts on the task at hand, not worrying about the next job or promotion. The lack of having a proper and clear centeredness in your life, basically the core values and principles in your life, would make you tend to fall or base your centeredness upon something that is fragile. For example, if you are someone with a money-centeredness, everything that you do, everything that you decide would center and circle around money. If you are someone who has a spouse-centeredness, everything that you decide in your life would depend or circling around your spouse, whether or not it would please the other person. If you are someone with an enemy-centeredness, then the success of the other person or the success of your enemy would destroy you. The thing about all of this tangible, fragile centeredness is that once you lost it, you would lose a sense of yourself. So it is very important for us to make a proper centeredness in ourselves, basically the core values, the core principle in our life, not basing on these fragile things, but based on the values that is within us. You can go inside yourself and see what is the most important thing in your life. And in order to do this, you have to identify your roles and the goals for each of the roles. For example, I am a mother. I want my child to be successful in life. I want to raise her good. I want her to have a good home environment. And as a wife, I want to have a happy marriage. The role as a servant of Allah should be perform my prayers to do good to other people. I would get to the goal that I want as a servant of Allah, which is to get heaven, which is to get the blessings of Him. So in order for you to have or to determine the centeredness or the core in yourself, you will need to identify your roles. And most of us have multiple roles in our life. We are a servant, we are a daughter, we are a husband. So for each roles in our life, we have to determine the goal for that. Let's move on to habit number 3, which to put first things first. So habit number 3, which is the put first things first, is basically putting and identifying your priority in life. It is essentially a practical fulfillment of habit number 1 and habit number 2. We have talked about independent will back in habit number 1, whereby as a human being, you have the independent will to choose your response to any stimulus. You have the conscious ability to act rather than to react. So when you have the independent will, you have the conscious choice to make, to organize and execute things around you according to your priorities. In order to do that, you have to first to organize yourself, and second is to manage the expectation of others. Now the author also has shown a table or a diagram, which I feel like is so helpful, in that he has put on 4 quadrants in this table. And in these 4 quadrants, you would have quadrant number 1, matters that are urgent and important. Quadrant number 2, you would have matters which are not urgent but important. You have quadrant number 3, which are urgent matters but not important. And you have quadrant number 4, which are the matters that are not urgent nor important. Now, if you are someone who keeps on focusing your time, energy, and effort in quadrant number 1, of course, it would show a significant and immediate results, because these are the things that are important as well as urgent. But focusing too much or spending too much time in quadrant number 1, it would lead you to having stress, burnout, and having to keep on resorting to crisis management. However, if you are someone who would only spend time in quadrant number 3 and quadrant number 4, you are basically living in an irresponsible life. So the author has suggested that in order for you to become an effective person, you will need to focus most of your time in quadrant number 2. Quadrant number 2 basically address and manage important things but not urgent. Because quadrant number 2 deals with the management, the time management, the planning of execution of your work, to exercise, to work out, to manage the health of yourself. Now you can see, if you manage your health from the early years, it would be less and less that you would need to manage the crisis. Instead of you pushing yourself too hard, not sleeping, not having a good lifestyle, and then eventually you would fall sick, and immediately those things become things that you will need to address in quadrant number 1. Same goes to relationship building. If you spend enough time with your spouse, with your family, with your friends, the relationship is strong enough for it to have any sort of breakdown or fallout, because you have always been attentive in keeping those relationships alive and good all this while. So in order for you to put first things first, you would also have to learn on how to say no. And I feel like for people pleasers, mostly it would be hard for you to say no, but it is eventually something that you will need to do, because you cannot please everyone, you cannot do everything for other people, but you have to manage the people's expectation by managing yourself, by managing and determining whether or not those falls in which quadrant. You would also need to identify your long-term and short-term goals, in that for long-term, based on your personal mission statement, you would need to identify your roles and what are your goals. So, but for short-term, determining your roles and goals, you will need to go and to see what are your plans for that. And according to that plan, you may schedule to make time for that plan, or you may delegate. So that's it for habit number 3, and that is the last habit in the private victory section. Now let's move on to the second part, which is the public victory, addressing and managing a relationship, the interdependence between you and other people. The author has said that private victory would prevail over public victory. This is because you cannot have an effective group of people working together if those people individually are not effective. You cannot have a good and loving family if all of those individuals in that particular family is just distorted. You would need to tackle the individual first, the private victory first, before you move on to public victory. The next one is the emotional bank account. As it suggests, it is basically a trust account, a trust bank account that you have that another person holds for you. Now, just like a normal bank or trust account, if you make a lot of deposits, then your account would be strong, it would have a lot or high value. But if you rarely make any deposit to that account, the account would not grow, the account would be weak, the account would not sustain itself. Any emergencies that you have, or you will need to make certain withdrawals from your account, would definitely damage the whole account. I think that it's a very brilliant metaphor that the author has made to see the management of a relationship that is based on the emotional bank account. As a human being, it would be impossible for us to escape mistakes. So mistakes that we make to another person would be considered as a withdrawal. When you have a good relationship, when you have a high trust in that relationship, any mistakes that you made, any withdrawal that you make from the emotional bank account would not affect your relationship as much. The author has suggested that you can do few things in order to make major deposits in the relationship that you have with another person. Number 1 is to understand that individual. Number 2 is to attend to little things. Number 3 is to keep commitments. Number 4 is to clarify expectations. Number 5 is to share personal integrity. And number 6, to apologize sincerely when you make withdrawal. So that is the public victory as defined and explained by the author. Now let's move on to habit number 4, which is to think win-win. In any interaction that you have with another person in your life, it would be the best for you to think win-win. Basically, to think and to want a mutual win, a mutual benefit, a mutual satisfaction to all parties involved in that interaction. Now, an effective person would always think win-win in their interaction with another person. The author has given 6 paradigms of interaction, 6 mindsets of people in their interaction, in their daily interaction with other people. Number 1 is win-win, of course. Like I said before, you wanting, or people involved wanting mutual benefit, mutual satisfaction, all parties involved. Number 2 is win-lose. Win-lose is basically someone with authoritarian approach or authoritarian mindset, in the sense that they want to win, they want to be correct, they want to be right all the time, and the other party must lose. Those kind of people would always use their position, use their power, use their status to exert the power, to exert the dominance over another person in order for them to win and in order for another party to lose. The next one, which is the opposite of the win-lose, is lose-win. Lose-win is basically someone with a paradigm, someone with a mindset of victimization. They would always victimize themselves. The author has said that a person with a lose-win mindset is actually worse than a win-lose mindset, because people with a lose-win mindset has no demands, has no expectations, has no goals, has nothing in their life. They're just like okay and being alright with everything that has been thrown in their way. Number 4 is the paradigm of lose-lose. Someone with a lose-lose paradigm is basically someone with a vindictive mentality. They don't care that they lose as long as the other person this mentality would not get that person anywhere, because you just basically do not have something for yourself. You just want the other person to suffer, and this is a very, again, dangerous mentality to have. The next one is the win mindset. Now, contrary to win-lose mindset, the win mindset is just someone who just wanted to win. They don't care what happened to the other person. They don't care if that person win or the other person lose. They just want to win themselves, meaning they do not wish any unfortunate, or they do not wish any loss to the other person, because they're just self-centered. And the sixth one is a win-win and no deal. And the author has suggested that if you are unable to reach a win-win agreement or win-win situation in an interaction that you face, then maybe it's better for you to have win-win or no deal kind of paradigm, because it means that both parties would respectfully agree to disagree, because they could not have or reach a mutual benefit for both parties. So it would be better for them to just not making a deal at all. Now, knowing these paradigms, how do we think or have a win-win mindset? The author has put out 3 steps in having this. Number 1 is by your character. You must have a win-win character. Number 2 is to have a win-win relationship. And number 3, to come for a win-win agreement. And in order for you to reach all of these 3, to apply all of these 3, you must have a supportive system and also processes. Now, for you to have a win-win character, it means that you would need to have an integrity and also maturity. The author has given us yet another diagram that is the level of maturity that you have. Now, you would need to have a high level of courage and high level of consideration if you want to think win-win. This is because if you have a low courage and low consideration, it's basically lose-lose. You just don't care, you just don't want to win, you just wanting something bad to the other person. So you would have the lose-lose paradigm or lose-lose mindset. However, if you have a very high courage but low consideration, it would give you a win-lose paradigm, because you have high courage to put out what you want in that interaction, but you would have very little thought on the other person. However, if you have low courage but very high consideration, now you would have the paradigm of lose-win, basically because you are very considerate of others, yes, but you have very low courage to put out your demands and expectations from that interaction. And of course, the balance of maturity falls in the win-win mindset, which you would need to have a high level of courage and high level of consideration. And with this maturity and integrity character, you would eventually go to your relationship. Look at before the emotional bank account. In order for you to have a win-win type of relationship, you would need to care, need to manage and care about the emotional bank account that you hold for one another. And the next one is the agreement. To have a win-win agreement between all the parties involved in that interaction, in that agreement, you would need to clarify the results, the guidelines, the resources, the accountability, and the consequences. Now, under this habit number 4, which is to think win-win, the author also has mentioned about the difference between someone with the scarcity mentality and the abundance mentality. And in order for you to have the win-win paradigm or win-win mentality, you would need to have an abundance mentality. Your mindset, you will need to think that if you are successful, it would not mean that someone is less successful. If someone else is successful in their own field, in their own way, it does not mean that they have taken away a bit of your success. Which means that if you have the win-win paradigm, you would actually be happy and contented with the other person's success. However, if you have a scarcity mentality, you would see success as a pie, which means that if someone else has taken a huge chunk of the pie, then it would leave you less part of the pie. So that's not it. Success is not that. And to have the win-win paradigm, you will need to accept the fact, and you will need to have the abundance mentality, and actually be happy and contented with the other person's win. Now let's move on to habit number 5, which is seek first to understand and then to be understood. I think that out of all habits in this book, I mostly struggled with habit number 1 and habit number 5, because I tend to get defensive, I tend to get emotional over things, and without actually acknowledging, without actually understanding what the other person has to say. Let's do better. So the author has talked about on how to be an effective person in your life. You would need to seek first to understand, then to be understood. Basically, you have to silence your mind, you have to silence your thoughts, silence your judgment, and actually listen and acknowledging the other person is putting out their perspective on that matter. Most people listen with the intent to reply instead of the intent to understand. And I feel like if people actually have and practice empathic listening, we would have less disagreements, less miscommunications, because we would actually take time to understand each other. And the reason why we would need to have or practice empathic listening, because we tend to project our own insecurities, our own judgments against what the other person has to say. We tend to project our own autobiography, our own life experience, without acknowledging the fact that the other person who's talking actually have a different background, different autobiography than you. So that is why it is very important for you to silence your mind and to actually listen, to understand, to have an effective interaction, in effective relationship with the other person. An effective person would have the humility to actually acknowledge the fact that he does not know everything in this world. He does not have the projection of the other person's thoughts and beliefs. So he suggested for us to practice an empathic listening. And to practice an empathic listening, he also says to avoid using any kind of technique against another human being, because this technique can actually be sensed and actually create duplicity. Instead of repeating back the words without fully understanding where he's coming from, you would need to silence your mind and actually understand where he's coming from. The reason why you would need to have the understanding and the perception of the person that you are talking to is because that person may look at things in their spouse-centered glass or family-centered glass, while you may look at things from the economy sense, from the money-centeredness from your eyes. So it is important for you to get into the agreement, get to the middle point or middle agreement with another person in order for you to have an effective communication. And then after you seek to understand the person, seek to see where he's coming from, you may seek to be understood by the other person. You must put your expectation contextually and specifically for the other person to understand your position. And this expectation must be made with a very deep understanding of the other person's paradigms and other person's expectation, so that again you would meet in the middle and you would have the agreement clear and concise. Now let's move on to habit number 6, which is synergize. I was actually puzzled when I first looked at this habit number 6 because I don't really understand what is synergy. Habits number 6 is synergize, basically to be able to value the differences between you and another person. And to put it that way, the author has actually put out an example, the position and interaction between a man and woman in sexual relationship, between a man and woman, on how we do not focus on both of them to have similarities, because that would be gay, but on how in sexual relationship between a man and woman, we value the differences between man and woman, the anatomy, the sexual anatomy, the sexual needs, roles of both of the parties in order to make the sexual relationship work. How do we appreciate this sexual relationship and to value these differences in that sexual relationship is or would be the same on how we should manage the social, the mental and emotional differences between people. So to synergize is basically for you to value the differences and to build on strength. And in order for you to reach the level of synergy, it would be based on the level of communication that you have with another person. So for example, if you have a low cooperation and low trust with one another in that communication that you have, the communication would be hostile and would get defensive, and it would not get to be an effective communication between the parties. However, if you have a medium sense of cooperation and also a medium sense of trust between one another, then the communication may be respectful because both parties has compromised to talk to one another. But in order for you to reach the level of synergy, both parties would need to have a high level of cooperation and high level of trust. Basically, when you cooperate and trust one another, then your agreement would reach the synergy level. So the last one is habit number 7 is to sharpen the saw. The author has begin this chapter on how a man has spent his time for 5 hours in the forest trying to sawing and chopping down a tree. And when asked why didn't he stop, take a rest and sharpen his saw so that he can go faster in chopping down that tree, he would just say that he does not have time to take a break because he has to chop down the tree, he has to saw down the tree. And from that story, I feel like it is obvious on how effectiveness can actually help you to manage your work and to get to your goal. And in this habit number 7, which is to sharpen the saw, he talks about on how in order for us to become an effective person, we would need to renew our dimensions. And we have 4 dimensions. He said we have mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual dimension. And in order for you to renew your physical dimension, he suggested that you would need to spend more time in quadrant number 2, that is to care for your own health. The next one is the social and emotional, and I feel like it also covers mental. That is the habit number 1 until habit number 3, which basically manage our own mental and emotional health. Meanwhile, to renew our spiritual dimension, he talks about on how focusing on habit number 2, which is to begin with the end in mind, would help you tremendously in achieving your goal and to actually be an effective person. And that's it. Those are the 7 habits of highly effective people. And as I said before, I feel like this is worth the read. And for what I've shared is just purely based, briefly based on what I understand from this book. I hope all of you enjoy this video. Please let me know if you like it and you want to see more of this. I've read a few more books actually after this book. So please let me know if you want me to read any book and to put on a review and summary for you in the comments down below. So with that, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.